Hello and welcome to The Future is Spoken, produced by the Digital Assistant Academy. This show accompanies the Digital Assistant Academy's course entitled Voice Interaction Design. Gone are the days when the primary focus for design was the eyes, and in are the days when we must also design for the ears. How can a digital assistant or chatbot not only perform tasks properly, but also make sense and be understood by different users around the world? In this episode, Hans van Dam, founder and CEO of the Conversation Design Institute, based in the Netherlands, discusses and explains writing for listenability. What is it? And how can a designer incorporate it in their work? Hello and welcome to The Future is Spoken. Today we are speaking with Hans van Dam, the founder and CEO of the Conversation Design Institute. Hello, Hans.
Hi there.
How's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for being here. So I guess we'll just dive right into it. Why don't you tell us about yourself, who you are, what do you do, and how'd you get here?
That's a lot already. That's a whole life you're asking about.
Yeah.
I guess I started out as a copywriter, and I always dreamed of being a novelist, and I wanted to write dialogue, and I wrote a manuscript, and all the publishers were like, we don't really care for it. So I became a copywriter and learned to write for tech companies and stuff like that. And then I had a failed startup that forced me to work in customer service for a while, and then when chatbots became a thing, I was like, hey, I can figure this out because I understand the technology, I know how to write dialogue, and I understand the service space. So I started focusing on that. And then, we learned about voice design and what to do for that. Started, pivoting into that direction. And then, once voice really became a big thing and everybody started looking for conversation designers, we founded a company called, it was now Conversation Design Institute, that really, trains and certifies conversation designers around the world. And that's what we're primarily focused on right now. So we're Amsterdam-based, but pretty much working around the world.
Very cool. So it was kind of like a natural progression, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think it's like I'm one of probably the only one in the world that could have founded this company with like the background of the writing dialogue from script, from novel writing, from fiction writing, and the service space and tech space. And so we started out as an agency. I once wrote a blog post that said we train our own people in our own academy, and then everybody started reaching out. It's like, can we also get training? And I'm like, oh wait, we should probably start doing that. And what we started doing is so Google was one of the first ones to reach out because they were interested also in training conversation designers around the world, because they were looking for adoption around the Google Assistant and other voice experiences. And they connected us with all these experts that had been doing this for 20 years. Because people have been automating conversations for a long time in call centers, etc. And we talked to all of them, we worked with all of them, and we saw what they were doing, and they all said the same thing. It's like, this is so new and so different from anything that's out there. You're never going to be able to teach anyone this. But we sort of saw what everybody was doing, and we've been able to capture that into a workflow, a step-by-step process that we can now teach and certify people on. And that's sort of the evolvement of the company. And it was really so just last month we transitioned into Conversation Design Institute because we see that there's just a big need for people to sort of, really figure out what conversation design is, what are the job titles, what are the underlying skill sets, how do different people and teams work together. And we're focused on solving that puzzle, and that's what we transitioned into. It's been good fun so far.
Definitely. Yeah, that sounds very interesting. And so you bring up an interesting point. What do you find is the path for a lot of your students, or a lot of the people that are interested in that? How do they get interested in that?
Yeah, it's they come from all walks of life, and I think it's already interesting to see that there's not just one conversation designer, and that might be one of the biggest misconceptions right now. So a lot of people think that conversation design is like an add-on for UX design, but it's actually a different beast in and of itself. If you look at the platform shift, you used that. We had the personal computer, and we started thinking about what is interface design. And then became mobile first, and we started thinking about UX design. And now it's AI assistants, and we start to think about conversation design. So it's a whole different thing. And if you look at UX design, how big that field is, and how many different roles there are, and how many sub-disciplines and micro skills there are to learn in UX design, you're going to see the same thing in conversation design. So right now, we recognize 3 different roles, 3 certificates that we have, and one of them is the AI trainer. That's the most technical, and that person turns data into understanding, training language models, implementing the technology, going over data, optimizing it. These people often, it's light data science, or often like overqualified customer service people that are used to working in complex systems and have some user centricity in them already. So those are the AI trainers. Then you've got the conversation designers. Those are often people with a background in UX. So these people think about, how do I turn knowledge or a business process into a natural conversation that really flows, that people, enjoy interacting with. So it's more UX heavy, has more research in it. Sometimes these people also come from knowledge management or more from the business side of it. And then there is the conversational copywriter that really turns words into dialogue, that thinks about tone of voice, personality, psychology. These people often, these are your strong writers. So these people have a background in copywriting, content management, marketing, communication. So they sort of come from all walks of life. And if we now look at universities, if we look what's reaching out to us, it's schools from journalism and media design, interaction design, that are all reaching out to work with us to figure out what to teach their students for the jobs of the future, pretty much, right? So I guess it's so diverse already that we see a lot of people entering the field.
Wow, that is very interesting. So moving on, the discussion today, or the topic, I guess, of this podcast is writing for listenability. So why don't you give our listeners a little bit of an understanding and a definition of what is exactly writing for listenability?
Yeah, so for us, that our workflow is we everything we design, doesn't matter if a chatbot or a voice assistant, we design voice first. Because our entire thinking is that if you can figure it out by voice, which is the most complicated interface in the world, because people can say and do whatever they want at any given moment, and there's very short attention span of understanding what is being said. If you can figure it out in voice, you can figure it out in a chatbot and use it everywhere. So everything that we do is voice first. And if you want to have it easy to be listened to and explain to people what they need to do next, there are lots of fundamental conversation design techniques, and there's the more advanced techniques. So if you look at the fundamentals, the basic structure is really acknowledgement, confirmation, prompt, which says that, see, right now, I can see you, so I see that you're nodding your head, which is kind of an acknowledgement, and people do that a lot, and it sort of signals that, you're listening and something's going to happen. So when a voice assistant usually starts with an acknowledgement by saying, okay, sure, check, got it, that tells the user, oh, wait, he's heard me. Now I'm going to sort of use an implicit confirmation. Sure, so you want to know the weather in Toronto, which is an implicit confirmation. So I'm repeating what you pretty much asked me, so that you know that what I'm going to say next, the new information, is going to be relevant to you. And then I'll communicate the new information in a way that you'll understand it. And usually that ends with a question, with a prompt, so that signals to you that it's your turn to speak again. And that's really fundamental conversation design. And if you do that and keep that short, it's easy to understand. One technique that we use a lot is the one breath test. In voice design, if you cannot say the prompt in one word, it's probably too long, right? And that's sort of and then you polish it up, take words out, make it simpler. So that's like the fundamental structure of a message in voice. But now, obviously, the question is, how do you design that message, and how do you know what it needs to be, and how does that work? And we have an entire workflow around that. So if we look at how do we generally design conversations, We have a canvas for that has both bot needs and user needs. Because when we have a conversation, we both want to get something out of that conversation, right? So you will have so you'll be the user, and you'll have certain information that you need, something you want to do, certain expectations, certain motivations, certain anxieties, and we pretty much want to map all of that. Get a good understanding of what's actually going on in your mind as you interact with this assistant. And then from the other hand, if I'm the bot, I'm the AI assistant, there's certain questions that I need to ask you, certain information that I need to get from you, certain things that I might be able to look up in a database. Maybe there's certain legal information that I need to share. So I have a list of rules and tasks in a way as an AI assistant, right? And then we map both of those. And what we'll do in the design process is actually sit back to back from each other. So we can't see each other because we don't want any nonverbal cues as we interact. So we sit back to back from each other, and then we actually do improvisational theater. We do sample dialogue, and pretty much means you're going to get into character, into that user of that wants to order a pizza or whatever, and into that mindset, and I'll get into the mindset of the bot, and we'll figure out what the conversation is going to be. And what you'll see in that first interaction is going to be very messy. It's going to be super clumsy. It's going to be terrible. It's going to be frustrating, and it's going to be super uncomfortable usually. But we'll learn a lot because each time you ask me a question, I'll think, is this something that more people would want to know? If I say these shoes are going to look great on you, and you're going to be like, okay, how much are they? That's probably a question everybody would want to know, right? So then I know that I should proactively already communicate that information. Right. So by doing the sample dialogue and doing that role play, I will know what kind of information I need to deliver at which time. Right. And that creates empathy. And once you have empathy in your design, you pretty much gain your users' trust and confidence that you will take them to the right solution in a way. Right. So if you ask me a question and with my initial response, you feel like I really understand you, you will follow along in the dialogue. And I'll be able to ask you simple questions in the right order and extract the information that I need to make it successful. And that is really the fundamental design process. So we map, the user needs and the bot needs. We do sample dialogue to structure the conversation in a way that works. And then the copywriter comes in that crafts that into, actually good writing. It's easy to listen to and easy it's pleasant. You can apply psychology for certain things to, increase motivation or take away certain anxieties that people might have.
Wow, that sounds very interesting. So there's a lot involved and a lot of testing, it sounds like. You mentioned a few times the psychology and the language behind it with the copywriters and the writing. And I was also reading an article of yours before this interview, and you were discussing the balance between technology, psychology, and language, which I find very fascinating. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah. It's in a way, it's quite simple, right? If you talk to a voice assistant, if you're talking to an AI assistant, there's one big obvious challenge, and that's one person has an artificial brain and the other person has a human brain, right? And if we want to have conversations in which we're sort of equal conversational partners, then we should probably understand, the technology brain, the artificial brain and the human brain, and they should be equally important, right? So we need to understand the limitations and capabilities and the triggers that both brains need to really turn it into a good conversation that keeps going. And you see a lot of people, a lot of companies when they start out initially, they only focus on that artificial brain, right? So an artificial brain, in order for it to function, it needs structured data, right? So you'll have NLU, so people can speak naturally, and then extract intents and entities, and that tells the artificial brain like, hey, this is what this person wants, and it finds an answer and it responds accordingly, right? But on the other hand, you have a human, and the human brain works completely differently, right? And it needs, it has different triggers that it needs, and people want empathy, they want guidance, sometimes they want a compliment. So when you design these conversations, you want to make sure that you have that in there. Just to keep the human brain activated, to keep it excited, to keep it motivated, and to have the conversation carry on. And that's really what we try to focus on with our clients, is that usually when they start these projects, they'll have 10 engineers, and then they'll have like one writer that is in charge of turning it into a good experience. But yeah, if you're an engineer, everything is an engineering problem, right? If you're holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And that's sort of the problem that you see there. So what we try to do is actually set up departments where the designers get a fair seat at the table with the engineers, where they can sort of represent that human side of it, to make sure that you create much better experiences. And that's sort of how the psychology, the language, and the technology always work together. And a lot of companies fail in their projects because they don't understand that balance. And if you look at our workflow that we've developed, it unifies those three elements, the tech, the psychology, and the language in the best way possible. That just makes it easier for people to create good conversational experiences.
So it sounds like it's being utilized and basically designed for a person, an actual human being, to be able to interact with the whatever it is, and rather than actually just getting specific information, to actually have a real conversation where they're gaining information from that conversation.
Yeah, they sort of work hand in hand, right? If I'm let's say I'm an AI assistant and I say, ask me a question, then you can ask me any question, which probably makes it very difficult for me to answer it, right? Because you might ask me about a ton of stuff. If I say, ask me a question about water, you're probably going to ask me a question about water. So what I'm already doing there is I'm framing my question, influencing your brain already, so that I control the output that you're going to give me, right? So that's a very simple way of how you can apply psychology and use it to sort of decrease your dependency on your technology. So with a lot of these issues in companies is that, if you have an engineering mind, you have no idea how what kind of trouble you can get yourself into. Well, if you put a bunch of designers in the room that really understand how to talk to people, because at the end of the day, that's what we're doing. We're talking to people, which we should be kind of good at as regular human beings. Once you start to understand that and how they work together, then you just save a lot of time. It's much easier to implement, and you're just going to get a lot of results much faster. Because usually, when you coming back to the initial point around empathy, if you feel understood, I can ask you very simple questions and you just answer, right? So you'll follow along and I'll ask you very binary questions like, are you looking for running shoes or just regular? I'm looking for running shoes. Oh, do you like marathons or just short sprints around the park? Oh, I like to do the short runs around the park. All right, so what's your shoe size? And they become very simple, small questions, and you're happy to answer it. And why are you happy to answer it? Because you know you're on the right path, right? That if you go somewhere, you ask a question, and you don't feel understood, you start over communicating, right? Because you become frustrated and you start communicating a lot. And with people, that's okay, but a voice assistant will break immediately, right? So again, understanding the mindset of the user allows you to take control of the conversation. And once you have control of the conversation, it makes it much easier to get your users involved and give them a human-centric experience that helps them get the stuff done they want to.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what techniques would a writer need to adopt to ensure that they are providing this experience to not only the organization that they're developing for, but also the user at the end of the experience?
Yeah. So in the workflow, once you've sort of set up, through the role playing your low fidelity conversation, sort of your first draft, and you have the structure of it, you go into the step we call expert rewrite. And what happens there is really, like you see with screenwriting, the writers sit in the room and they read the prompts out loud and then they iterate based on that. And that's when you get into, so you'll apply the fundamentals like the acknowledgements, confirmations, and the prompts, but then you start applying psychology. If you look at, Cialdini, his persuasive principles, scarcity, social proof, anticipatory enthusiasm, these are all psychological techniques that you can apply when you design conversations. On the other end of the spectrum, there's techniques for delivering bad news, or managing emotions in customer service. We have about 50 different copywriting techniques that you can apply in certain situations: default options, scarcity, and it really depends on the situation what you want to apply. But the conversational copywriter really has a toolkit of making sure that we steer people towards desired behavior. That's the way of looking at it, right? So if I say, going back to that previous example, it's like, oh, these sneakers are going to look great on you. You would ask, how much are they? Oh, they're $100. I would probably say, these sneakers look great on you. They're only $100, and that would already be the improvement, sort of. And then you could say, well, most people running around the park, most people in larger cities, most people running around the park love these sneakers, and they're only $100. What I'm doing there is applying social proof that is going to increase your motivation, and that's how you start rewriting these prompts to make them more effective. Another concept of it is BJ Fogg just published a book called Tiny Habits. It's about behavior design, lots of principles that you can learn there. And a way to look at behavior is that there's always ability, motivation, and a prompt, right? So if somebody's super motivated, it doesn't matter if it's a little harder for them to accomplish it, right? But if they're not very motivated, it needs to be super simple, right? And there always needs to be a prompt that triggers them into that action, right? And that's sort of how behavior works in general. And really, there's specific techniques that, if you have a situation, you think, oh, wait, I need to create better prompts to trigger the behavior. Well, then you can use exceptional benefits or a simple question, which are all writing techniques. Or if you need to look at, you need to work on the ability to make it easier for people, well, you might want to look at default options, choice architecture, which are all psychological writing techniques. If you want to look at motivation, you might want to focus on scarcity, social proof, anticipatory enthusiasm. So if you look at it through that lens from behavior design, there's just different proven copywriting techniques that you can apply that have been used in advertising and UX design for a long time.
Wow, that's really cool. So that sounds very interesting actually. So I think we'll move on to maybe more of the broader scope here. I was wondering, what are some of the unexpected ways that you see voice is going to be utilized in the future that may not be obvious right now?
Yeah, it's tricky. Like it's nobody knows. Some people think we're going to be chatting to everything and talking to everything. It's like every room we enter, and we'll turn on the lights, and we will never touch anything again. Particularly now with COVID. Everybody sees it. The therapy use cases, particularly with the elderly against loneliness. We have self-driving cars, the interaction there. You obviously see social robotics. There's robots in theme parks. You can see it in VR systems. We've also had clients that are oil manufacturers, where people are out in the field and they're just working, so that their hands are busy holding equipment, and they interact with a voice assistant as well to navigate them through the work process, almost like that's incorporated with like Google Glasses type things, right, where you're sort of interacting with it that way. VR applications. It's really, since it is the most natural interface there is, it is to be expected that every interaction could potentially be a voice interaction. But I think it's not just going to be voice. And I think that's where, the multimodal aspects of it come, where it's voice and a screen, or voice and a hologram, right? Can be anything, but yeah, if you can interact with it, you can talk to it. And I guess you can interact with everything that is not, not yet. So you won't have a tree, but, pretty much any door that needs to open, every light that needs to switch on, every product you want to order or review, or every company you want to interact with, will be done via voice eventually. but it might take much longer than we now think.
Yeah, that's an interesting point as well. The time frame. Like for example, one thing that you mentioned that's really interesting to me is the idea of, like you said, therapy for the elderly, things like that. How do you see that as a timeline? Because obviously, usually those are the stereotypically last people to adopt, a new or innovative or futuristic technology. So what do you see as like a timeline or a possible timeline for that?
I mean, with those use cases, it's already like family giving it, or it's like the home itself, where everybody is gives them to people, or it's the family. Uh, yeah, they can come from any direction because there's always someone that benefits from that, right? So you see that happen more and more. I know here in the Netherlands, there was a project where Google, I think, donated like 10,000 speakers to elderly just for them to interact with and have fun with. I don't know how it is, how they receive it, like if they appreciate it yet. I haven't heard much about that yet. But it's tricky. You're going to get into, I think now conversational data control is going to be a bigger issue. So now we sort of appreciate the interface. We all see that's going to grow. We all see the potential in the use cases. The next step, as conversations become more personalized and more transactional, is also to think about privacy and security and compliance and those type of things, which could then slow down the adoption as well. And particularly if you go into mental therapy, those things become more important. So,
Right. Okay. And if what would be your top three pieces of advice to writers going into conversational design?
um, yeah, don't wing it. I think it is good to understand that it is a job, and it's a very serious job, and it's a combination of creativity and craftsmanship. And you wanna, particularly in this market right now, and you wanna make sure. One of the biggest challenges that new designers have is actually creating a reputation for themselves and building a portfolio and getting out there. One of the things that we try to do and help them is actually create alignment in the industry. So we've drafted a manifesto, which we published in our foundation, that we've co-authored with us partners and clients and designers, where we really call for alignment on job titles, underlying skill sets, and workflow. Because the bigger problem right now is that designers struggle to promote themselves and get clients. But enterprises, on the other hand, don't really know what to look for. They don't know where to look. They don't even know what to qualify them for and how to hire and onboard them. Technology companies, they develop software, but they're not really sure who's using it and how they use it. So universities don't even know what kind of thing to train people for, right? So it's very important that we have alignment on conversation design of what we call things and what the skill sets are, because that is just going to increase liquidity in the entire conversation design market. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do. So if you're now starting out as a writer in conversation design, make sure that you actually get proper training, that you understand the context that you're working in, and that you then just put in the hours and learn to build that portfolio. I guess that was, I don't know if that was three, but that was
Yeah, no, that's great advice.
generally my advice. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense too, because I think what like going back even just a few years before the term, UX or UI designer was the norm, it was kind of like a software developer or maybe even a computer programmer that specifically did this one thing. So I think that would be very helpful for if that was kind of if there was alignment across the industry. I definitely agree with that. So I just became a certified voice and interaction designer, let's say. What is my next step to ensure my career will be set up for success? And yeah.
I mean, the next step is really to build your own portfolio, right? And you can do that with demo projects. Obviously, we also in our community we reach out to lots of designers for smaller projects to bring them on there. Write about all the stuff that you've learned. So we have a publication for that with certified designers. Write for others. So it's really about getting yourself out there. But one of the issues that we see with a lot of designers is that people are not necessarily hiring much for someone that can make an experience on the Google Assistant or Alexa. Most companies aren't necessarily interested in that, and I think as a conversation designer, it's important to understand the context that you're going to be working in, because a lot of these enterprises are they're looking to automate 85% of their conversations with people. And they're doing that on various channels via chatbots and voice assistants, in their apps, in the call center. And they're setting up a team that is going to do all of that, right? And that's where the most of the hiring is actually being done. What does that core department look at? So understanding that context and the dynamics of the organization that you're going to be working in is very important to put yourself in the market properly. Because a lot of designers or a lot of people that just enter the field think that all they're going to be doing is actually build something cute for the Google Assistant or Alexa. And then there's just a mismatch with the enterprise. So again, it comes to, understanding the entire dynamics of the market and building that portfolio around that.
Cool. So it's almost like a larger metaphor, a larger use case for your understanding of psychology and language, building yourself not only in for the user experience, but building yourself towards your future career of what that might be after you're a voice designer.
Yeah, that might actually be a very good meta way of looking at it. Yeah, but I mean, overall, if you put in the work and you build, you make good stuff. You put in the work. You understand the dynamics. You understand the workflow. You're gonna be fine, because just like you cannot imagine a company without engineers today, you will not be able to imagine a company without conversation designers 5 years from now. Estimates are that the world's going to be needing about 5 million conversation designers. So if you don't do any weird stuff and you enter this field now, then you're going to be fine. And also what you see is that there's already a larger push as well, where we don't just want to put our entire operation into the hand of engineers, right? People are getting into that now. We see all the issues around data and privacy, and not thinking about that ultimate user experience around trust, because that's obviously what a conversation designer does as well, is create trust around an AI experience. That is becoming more important, and companies are aware of it. So if you now just enter the fields and you get your training in and you become certified and you build a reputation and a portfolio, you're going to be fine. They're going to be looking for you. That's the one thing that I can guarantee everyone listening to this. Yeah.
Very cool. That's good to know. So I guess we can start to wrap it up here. Before we kind of end it off, is there anything that you'd like to discuss or add that I didn't specifically ask or that didn't come up here?
Not necessarily. I think we covered a lot of the good stuff that, I guess the passion for the fields and the future of conversation design is what we talked about. And that's what we're excited about, recognizing, developing, and promoting conversation design. And if people want to know more and learn about, how they can get trained and certified, they can go to conversationdesigninstitute.com. Always happy to help people get there. Or just go to the .org and read about the manifesto and what it entails. And soon we're going to be launching all our partners that have co-authored that. So that's going to be an exciting one. So keep an eye out for that.
Very cool. So that's conversationdesigninstitute.com for the course, and then .org for the manifesto and that kind of the more job-focused type of things, right? Or industry-focused. Cool. Well, that was great. Very interesting. And thank you so much for being here on The Future is Spoken.
Thank you so much for having me.
Have a good one.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening today. Remember, you can find all the information on how to become a certified voice interaction designer, along with show notes and more, at our website, digitalassistant.academy. That's digitalassistant.academy. We encourage your feedback and questions, so be sure to get in touch by using the contact page at the Digital Assistant Academy's website. We'll include the link in the show notes. In our next episode, Philip Hunter discusses the importance of voice analytics and performance optimization.